Hey, so tonight we're going to talk about something that'll make you super grateful for that hot shower you took today. We're diving into Victorian hygiene, and trust me, it's going to be a wild ride. Think fancy dresses and top hats? Yeah, well, let's just say what was happening underneath those beautiful clothes was, not so beautiful. Oh, and if you're enjoying these stories, I'd really appreciate a like or subscribe. Super curious where you're all listening from, so drop a comment with your location and what time it is there. Always blows my mind how people are falling asleep to this all over the world. Alright, find that cozy spot, take a nice slow breath, and just let your body sink into whatever you're lying on. We're heading back to 1850-something London, and trust me, you're going to be real grateful for that mattress by the time we're done. So, congratulations! You just woke up in Victorian London. The first thing that hits you isn't what you see, it's what you smell. That thick, heavy, almost chewy air that seems to stick in your throat. It's like, well, imagine if someone took every smell you've ever tried to avoid and mixed them all together in a big, steaming pot. Human waste. Rotting garbage. Smoke from thousands of coal fires. And something else. Something sweet and sick and wrong that you can't quite place. You shift slightly in your bed, whatever bed you're lucky enough to have, and immediately feel how different everything is. The sheets, if you have sheets, feel rough against your skin, scratchy, nothing like the soft cotton you're used to, and they smell. Well, let's just say fabric softener won't be invented for another century or so. Good news? You're alive. Bad news? Well, basically everything else. Let's start with where you are. If you're poor, which most people were, you're probably sharing a room with, maybe 6 or 8 other people. Could be your family, could be strangers. Doesn't really matter because privacy is pretty much a luxury only rich folks can afford. The room is maybe 10 feet by 12 feet. That's it. And everyone's just there. Breathing each other's air, sharing each other's, well, everything. The walls are damp, always damp. There's this weird green stuff growing in the corners that nobody talks about, but everybody pretends not to see. Your breathing naturally slows in and out as you take in this strange, smelly new world. If you're middle class, and lucky you if you are, things are better. You might have your own bedroom, maybe even your own bed. But better is relative. Your house still doesn't have running water, still doesn't have electricity, and that bathroom you're thinking about, yeah, that's not really a thing yet. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Everyone in this era thinks they're clean, like genuinely believes they're maintaining good hygiene. It's just that their definition of clean is, well, let's call it different. Take bathing, for example. You know that daily shower you took? That long, hot, relaxing wash where you shampooed your hair and scrubbed every inch of your body? Forget it. Not happening. In fact, if you suggested taking a full bath every day, people would think you were genuinely insane. A comfortable sigh escapes, because even thinking about their bathing schedule makes you appreciate that warm shower even more. See, Victorians believed that bathing too much was actually dangerous, like medically harmful. They thought all that water would weaken your constitution, make you sick, maybe even kill you. So most people, they'd take a full bath maybe once a week. If they were fancy, if they were poor, maybe once a month, maybe. But here's the thing, they weren't just sitting around dirty, they had this whole system worked out. It was called a sponge bath, and basically you'd wash the important bits. Face, hands, armpits, and the naughty bits. That was it. Everything else? Well, everything else could wait until bath day. Picture this. You're standing in your bedroom, because that's where most people washed, next to a little wooden stand with a bowl and a pitcher of cold water. Cold, because hot water on demand, that's basically magic at this point. You pour the water into the bowl, grab a cloth or a sponge, and you just spot clean. Like you're detailing a car, but the car is your body, and the detailing is minimal. Your shoulders drop, releasing some of that tension as you imagine how different their mornings must have been. The wealthy folks, they had it a bit better. Some of them had these fancy copper bathtubs that servants would fill with hot water carried up from the kitchen, but even they weren't bathing daily, maybe twice a week if they were real hygiene enthusiasts. And get this, by multiple people would often use the same bath water. Dad goes first, then mum, then the kids in order of age. By the time little Billy gets his turn, that water is, well, let's just say it's more like soup than water. Teaching people how to take a bath. Can you imagine? Bath for Dummies, but in 1858. These books had rules, because apparently that could kill you. Don't wash your face when travelling unless you can purify the water with alcohol or ammonia first. Take Russian baths, where you wash your face with extremely hot water, then extremely cold water to prevent wrinkles. Getting more comfortable now, settling deeper into your bed, and honestly, their bathing advice sounds exhausting. Now let's talk about teeth. Oh boy, let's talk about teeth. Toothbrushes existed, but they were expensive and, how do I put this, not great. They had wooden handles and bristles that were basically just really stiff animal hair. Like, imagine brushing your teeth with a tiny scrub brush. One that costs about as much as you'd spend on groceries for a week. So, what did poor people do? Well, they got creative. Some people used celery, just chewed on celery and hoped for the best. Others made their own toothpaste out of chalk, soot, or powdered cuttlefish bone. Yeah, cuttlefish bone, in your mouth, on purpose. And if you had a toothache, well, good luck with that. Most places didn't have dentists. Instead, you'd go to your local barber or blacksmith. The same guy who cuts hair and shoes horses is now going to poke around in your mouth with whatever tools he's got handy. No anesthesia. No proper training. Just hope for the best and try not to scream too loud. A yawn escapes, and you're suddenly very grateful for modern dentistry. Hair washing was its own adventure. Remember, no shampoo. So what did people use? Well, eggs. Women would crack eggs over their heads and work the yolks into their hair like they were making breakfast on their scalp. Then they'd rinse it out with pitchers of water. The smell must have been interesting. Other popular options included vinegar mixed with water, black tea, rum, or rosemary. Basically, if it was in the kitchen and liquid, someone probably tried washing their hair with it. The wealthy had access to fancier concoctions, but even they were basically making their own shampoo out of whatever was lying around. And here's the kicker. They only washed their hair maybe once a month. Maybe. Women's hair was considered their crowning glory, so they'd pile it up in elaborate styles and leave it that way for weeks. They'd add oils and pomades to keep it healthy, but, well, those oils would go rancid after a while, so their beautiful hair would smell like rancid fat. Lovely. You shift slightly, finding a more comfortable position as you think about how different their daily routines must have been. Laundry was a whole other nightmare. No washing machines, obviously. Everything had to be done by hand, and soap was expensive, so people got creative. Oil stains were treated with chalk, blood and grass stains were removed with kerosene, other odours were fought with milk. And for bleaching? Well, they'd soak their clothes in urine, human urine, because urine contains ammonia, which is actually a pretty good cleaning agent. But still, urine. The whole process took forever. You'd haul water, heat it up, scrub everything by hand, rinse it, and then hang it to dry. A full wash day could take all day, literally all day. So most people only did laundry once a week if they were lucky. Some people went longer, which means, well, people wore the same clothes for days at a time, sometimes weeks. that beautiful Victorian outfit you're picturing? It probably hadn't been washed in a while. Nice and easy, just breathing and thinking about how much effort it took just to stay basically clean. Let's talk about underwear, or, well, the lack thereof. Most poor people didn't wear underwear at all. None. The wealthy might have linen undergarments, but even those weren't changed very often. And women's clothing? Oh boy. Layers and layers of heavy fabric. Corsets that hadn't been washed in months. Petticoats that, let's not even think about petticoats. All of this clothing would absorb sweat, body odour, food smells, smoke from fires, everything, and it would just stay there, trapped in the fabric until the next wash day, which, remember, might not be for weeks. So picture walking down a London street in the summer, hundreds of people, all wearing heavy, unwashed clothing, all smelling like, well, themselves, plus whatever they'd eaten for breakfast, plus smoke from coal fires, plus horse manure from the streets, plus, well, you get the idea. The smell would be intense. Like a physical presence following you around, something you could taste in the air. Your breathing naturally slows, settling deeper into this strange world where staying clean was a daily struggle nobody really won, and that was just personal hygiene. We haven't even talked about the streets yet. Oh, the streets. London in the 1850s was home to about 2.5 million people. That's a lot of people making a lot of mess. And there was no organised garbage collection, no street cleaning. People just threw their garbage out the window into the street, where it would sit and rot and attract rats. Human waste was, well, that's a whole other story. Most houses didn't have toilets. Instead, people used chamber pots. Basically, you'd do your business in a pot under your bed, and then, well, someone had to empty it, usually into the street, or into a shared privy in the backyard, or, if you were really lazy, just out the window. There were people called night soil men who would come around and empty the cesspools and privies, but they only worked at night because the job was considered too disgusting for daylight hours. And where did all that waste go? Well, mostly into the Thames, London's main river, the same river people got their drinking water from. Yeah, think about that for a minute. You settle deeper into your bed, muscles relaxing, as you try to imagine living in a world where the river you drink from is also the place everyone dumps their sewage. The horses made it worse. London ran on horsepower, thousands and thousands of horses pulling carriages, delivery wagons, omnibuses, and horses poop a lot. It was estimated that a single horse produced about 35 pounds of manure per day. Multiply that by thousands of horses and, well, you do the math. All of this waste would pile up in the streets. When it rained, it would wash around, creating these, let's call them rivers of nastiness. When it was dry, it would bake in the sun and create clouds of dust. Dust that was, well, let's just say you didn't want to breathe it. And yet, people did breathe it. Every day they walked through it, they lived with it, they thought it was normal because, well, everyone smelled the same. When everyone's environment is gross, gross becomes normal. That's it, getting more comfortable. Your muscles melting into the mattress as you think about how lucky you are to live in a time with soap and running water and actual garbage collection. The thing is, Victorians weren't stupid. They knew things were unpleasant. They just didn't really understand why people kept getting sick. They had this theory called miasma theory that basically said diseases were caused by bad air, bad smells. They thought if you could smell something foul, it could make you sick. Which, I mean, they weren't completely wrong. Bad smells usually meant bad sanitation, and bad sanitation definitely led to disease. But they thought the smell itself was the problem, not the underlying conditions causing the smell. So their solution was perfume. Lots and lots of perfume. Instead of fixing the source of the smell, they just tried to cover it up. Rich people would douse themselves in expensive fragrances. Poor people would use whatever they could find, maybe some cheap cologne or flowers or herbs. But here's the thing about trying to cover up the smell of unwashed bodies, unwashed clothes, and sewage-filled streets with perfume. It doesn't really work. It just creates this weird, sickly sweet combination that's somehow worse than the original smell. Imagine vanilla air freshener mixed with, well, a porta potty. That's basically what wealthy Victorians smelled like. A comfortable sigh escapes, and you're so grateful for modern understanding of hygiene and disease. Women had it particularly rough. Their clothing was even more complicated than men's. Layers and layers of heavy fabric, corsets that made breathing difficult, long skirts that dragged on the ground, picking up everything, and they were expected to look perfect at all times. Makeup existed, but it was dangerous. Face powder often contained lead, rouge contained mercury, and since people didn't understand what these chemicals could do to the human body, well, many Victorian women were literally poisoning themselves in the name of beauty. Hair dye was even worse. There was this popular product called Hall's Hair Renewer that promised to hide grey hair and restore youthful colour. The secret ingredient? Lead. People were rubbing lead directly into their scalps, wondering why they felt sick all the time. Your shoulders drop, releasing tension. As you think about how much we've learned about chemistry and safety. And then there were the beauty routines. Without modern skincare, people came up with interesting solutions. They'd use lemon juice to lighten freckles, butter to moisturize dry skin, raw meat as face masks. They'd sleep with slices of raw beef on their faces, thinking it would keep them looking young. The smell in a Victorian bedroom, especially a wealthy Victorian bedroom with all these beauty treatments, must have been complex. Raw meat, lead-based cosmetics, unwashed hair with rancid pomade, and whatever perfume they were using to try to cover it all up. But you know what? They made do. They adapted. They found ways to feel clean and attractive within the constraints of their world. It's actually kind of impressive when you think about it. They were working with what they had, doing their best with the knowledge available to them. Getting cozy now. Really settling in. And there's something almost admirable about their resourcefulness, even if their methods were questionable. The wealthy had servants to help with the worst of it, maids to empty chamber pots, laundresses to deal with the clothes, bath attendants to heat and carry water, but the servants themselves, well, they were often even dirtier than their employers. They couldn't afford to take time for personal hygiene when they were busy maintaining everyone else's. Poor people just did their best, shared resources, helped each other out, and accepted that being clean was a luxury they couldn't afford. They focused on survival, on finding enough food to eat, enough work to pay rent, enough coal to keep warm. Hygiene was, well, hygiene was something you worried about when you had everything else figured out. And in 1850-something London, most people definitely did not have everything else figured out. Nice and easy, breathing deeply as you imagine trying to navigate daily life in a world where everything was harder, where taking a bath was an event that required planning, where brushing your teeth was a luxury, where staying clean was a constant battle against a dirty world. The funny thing is, they probably would have looked at our modern obsession with cleanliness and thought we were crazy. Daily showers, changing clothes every day, washing our hands multiple times a day. They would have worried we were washing away our natural defences, making ourselves weak and susceptible to disease. Different times, different knowledge, different priorities, but underneath all the dirt and smell and questionable hygiene practices, these were still people, still families trying to make the best life they could for themselves and their children. They fell in love, told jokes, worried about money, celebrated birthdays. They had hopes and dreams and fears just like anyone else. They just smelled a lot worse while doing it. Settling deeper, that heavy, comfortable feeling spreading through your body as the strange world of Victorian London starts to feel a little more real, a little more human, despite all its challenges and unpleasant realities. But let's talk about something that'll really make you appreciate modern plumbing. Victorian toilets, or, well, the lack thereof. You know that bathroom down the hall, the one with running water and toilet paper and a seat that's actually comfortable? Yeah, forget about it. Most Victorians had never seen anything like that. Instead, they had alternatives. Your muscles relax as you think about how simple it is to just walk to the bathroom when you need to. If you were poor, and again, most people were, you shared an outhouse with maybe 100 other families. Picture this, one wooden shack built over a deep pit in a shared courtyard behind a row of houses. No privacy, no paper, no way to wash your hands afterward, just a hole in the ground with a wooden seat over it. The smell. Oh my God, the smell, especially in summer. It was like a physical wall you had to walk through just to get close to the thing. And the flies, so many flies, they'd swarm around the opening and you'd just have to deal with it. A yawn escapes and you're suddenly very grateful for indoor plumbing. The wealthy had it better, but not by much. They had these things called water closets, basically early toilets that were installed right in the house. Sounds fancy, right? Well, here's the catch. They didn't have modern plumbing, so where did all that waste go? Straight down into a cesspool in the basement. Yeah, a big open pit of human waste directly under the house, just sitting there, fermenting. The idea was that eventually someone would come and empty it, but, well, that didn't always happen on schedule. When the cesspool got full, the smell would start seeping up through the floorboards. The whole house would reek, and I mean reek. People would wake up in the morning feeling sick from the fumes that had been building up overnight. So they'd call the night soil men. These were the guys who specialised in emptying cesspools and privies. They only worked at night because, well, the job was considered too disgusting for daylight hours. Can you imagine? The work was so gross that it was literally illegal to do it when people could see. Your breathing naturally slows, settling deeper as you try to imagine living above a basement full of sewage. These night soil men would show up with shovels and buckets and, well, they'd dig. They'd haul buckets of human waste up from the basement and load it onto carts. The smell during this process was indescribable. Neighbours would close their windows and stuff rags under their doors, but the stench would still seep in. And where did all this waste go? Well, that's where it gets interesting. See, human waste was actually valuable. Farmers needed fertiliser and, well, human poop makes excellent fertiliser, so the night soil men would sell it. They'd cart it out to farms outside the city and sell it to farmers who would spread it on their fields. Which means the vegetables you'd eat for dinner were literally grown in human waste from the city, where people were dying of cholera and typhoid and God knows what else. The cycle was, well, it was pretty gross when you think about it. Getting more comfortable. And honestly, thinking about their farming practices makes you appreciate modern agriculture. But here's the thing, even this system was breaking down by the 1850s. London was just too big, too many people producing too much waste. The night soil men couldn't keep up. Cesspools were overflowing, streets were flooded with sewage when it rained, and diseases were spreading like wildfire. People were getting desperate. Some folks just gave up on the cesspool system entirely. They'd dump their chamber pots directly into the street, or out the window, or into the nearest river or stream. And guess what all those rivers and streams led to? The Thames, London's main source of drinking water. So people were literally drinking water contaminated with their own sewage, and wondering why they kept getting sick. Your shoulders drop, releasing that tension as you think about how obvious the connection seems now. The government knew there was a problem. Scientists knew there was a problem. Hell, everyone with a nose knew there was a problem, but nobody could agree on what to do about it. Some people thought the solution was to build more cesspools. Others wanted to dump everything into the Thames and let the river carry it away. Still others thought they should just live with it. After all, London had always smelled bad. Why change now? And then came the summer of 1858. Oh boy, the summer of 1858. It was hot, like really hot. Temperatures that London just wasn't used to, day after day of blazing sun and no rain. The Thames started running low, leaving thick deposits of sewage on the riverbanks, and in that heat, well, things started to ferment. The smell was beyond description. Imagine every gross smell you've ever encountered, multiply it by 1,000, and then imagine having to breathe it 24 hours a day. People were vomiting just from walking near the river. Families were abandoning their homes if they lived too close to the Thames. A comfortable sigh escapes, and you're so thankful for modern waste management. The press started calling it the Great Stink, and it was great, in the worst possible way. Charles Dickens wrote about it, calling the Thames a deadly sewer in the place of a fine, fresh river. Scientists took boat trips along the river, dropping pieces of white paper into the water to test how dirty it was. The paper disappeared instantly into the brown, soupy mess. But you know what finally got the government to act? When the smell reached Parliament. See, the Houses of Parliament sit right on the banks of the Thames, and in the summer of 1858, with the windows open for ventilation, well, the smell just poured in. Members of Parliament were literally fleeing the chamber, handkerchiefs pressed to their noses, gagging and retching. They tried dousing the curtains with lime and chloride to mask the smell. Didn't work. They considered relocating the entire government away from Westminster. That's how bad it was. The smell was so horrific that they were willing to abandon their brand new, expensive Parliament building rather than deal with it. Finally, they decided to do something about the sewage. That's it. Just relaxing into the story, thinking about how sometimes it takes a crisis to force change. They put a guy named Joseph Basil Jett in charge of fixing London's sewage problem. Poor bastard. Can you imagine getting that job? Hey Joe, we need you to figure out what to do with 2.5 million people's worth of poop, and we need it done yesterday. But Basil Jett was brilliant. He came up with a plan that was, well, it was audacious. He wanted to build a completely new sewer system for the entire city, not just patch the old one, build a brand new one from scratch. The plan involved building over 1,000 miles of new sewers under London's streets. These sewers would connect to main intercepting sewers that would carry all the waste downstream, away from the city centre, way downstream, like 8 miles downstream, where it would be dumped into the Thames estuary at high tide. The scale of the project was insane. They had to dig up half the city, demolish entire neighbourhoods, relocate thousands of families, build massive pumping stations to move the sewage uphill, line everything with millions of bricks, create embankments along the Thames to house the new sewers. Your breathing slows, nice and easy, as you imagine the incredible amount of work this must have required. It took years of constant construction, constant noise, constant disruption, streets torn up everywhere, the smell of cement and brick dust mixing with the smell of sewage, workers covered in mud and worse, digging tunnels deep underground, and the cost? Oh, the cost. In today's money, we're talking about billions of pounds, maybe tens of billions. The government had to raise taxes, issue bonds, borrow money from banks. People complained constantly about the expense. But you know what? It worked. When the new sewer system finally came online, the change was immediate. The smell disappeared. The Thames started running cleaner. Disease rates plummeted. People could actually walk along the river without gagging. It was like magic. All those years of living with the stench, and suddenly it was just gone. Settling deeper into your bed, feeling that heavy, comfortable weight, and thinking about how amazing it must have felt to finally be able to breathe clean air. The new system wasn't perfect, of course. They were still dumping raw sewage into the Thames, just further downstream, where it was someone else's problem. And the pumping stations broke down sometimes, causing temporary backups and overflows. But compared to what they'd been living with, it was a miracle. Unfortunately, not everyone benefited equally. The wealthy neighbourhoods got connected to the new system first. The poor areas, well, they had to wait, sometimes for years. So while the rich were enjoying their new, odour-free lives, the poor were still dealing with overflowing cesspools and sewage in the streets. Some things never change, right? But even for the poor, things gradually got better. As more areas got connected to the new system, public health improved across the board. Cholera outbreaks became less frequent. Typhoid rates dropped. People stopped dying from diseases that were entirely preventable. A yawn slips out. And you're thinking about how much we take for granted. Clean water, functioning sewers, toilet paper. Speaking of toilet paper, yeah, that wasn't really a thing yet. The first commercially produced toilet paper wasn't sold until the 1870s, and even then it was expensive and not very common. So what did people use? Well, whatever they could find. Old newspapers were popular among the middle class. Corn cobs were common in rural areas. Leaves, if you could find them. Rags that could be washed and reused. The wealthy might have soft cloths or even sponges, but most people just made do with whatever was available. And since there was no running water in most bathrooms, well, hand washing after using the toilet wasn't exactly standard practice, which brings us back to disease. So much disease. Cholera was the big killer. It would sweep through London in waves, killing thousands of people at a time. Poor areas were hit hardest because they had the worst sanitation, but the disease didn't discriminate. Rich people died too, and doctors had no idea what caused it. Remember, this was before germ theory, before people understood that diseases were caused by bacteria and viruses. They thought cholera was caused by bad air, by breathing in the foul smells from sewage and rotting garbage. Your muscles relax, sinking deeper into the mattress as you think about how scary it must have been to live in a world where disease struck randomly and doctors couldn't explain why. So their treatments were, well, let's call them creative. They'd try to purify the air with strong-smelling herbs. They'd burn sulfur or tar to create smoke that would supposedly chase away the disease. They'd give patients massive doses of opium or alcohol, thinking it would help them fight off the infection. None of it worked, of course. People kept dying. Families would lose multiple members in a single outbreak. Children were especially vulnerable. And through it all, the sewage kept flowing into the Thames, the same river people were drinking from. There was this one doctor, John Snow, who figured out the connection between contaminated water and cholera. He proved that people were getting sick from drinking sewage-contaminated water, not from breathing bad air. But nobody believed him. The medical establishment thought he was crazy. It wasn't until years later, after the Great Stink and the new sewer system, that people started to accept his theory. By then, thousands of people had died needlessly, nice and easy, just breathing and thinking about how frustrating it must have been to know the solution, but not be able to convince anyone to listen. Even after the sewers were built, old habits died hard. People were so used to dumping waste wherever was convenient that they kept doing it. Chamber pots still went out windows, garbage still got thrown into the street, factory waste still flowed into rivers. It took a generation for people to really change their behaviour, to understand that where you put your waste actually mattered, that rivers weren't just convenient dumps, they were water sources that other people depended on. The new sewer system helped, but it wasn't a complete solution. It was more like a really good start, a foundation that future generations could build on, and build on it they did. Over the decades that followed, London kept improving its sanitation systems. They added treatment plants, they built better pumps, they connected more neighbourhoods, they started regulating what factories could dump into the sewers. Slowly, very slowly, London transformed from one of the dirtiest cities in the world to one of the cleanest. Your breathing naturally deepens, settling into that warm, heavy feeling as you think about the incredible transformation that happened over just a few decades. The irony is that all this infrastructure, the sewers, the treatment plants, the regulations, it's basically invisible to most people. You turn on a tap and clean water comes out. You flush a toilet and waste disappears. You walk down the street and it doesn't smell like an open sewer. We don't think about it because it works so well, because people like Bazalgette did their job so thoroughly that we can just take it for granted. But for Victorians, especially in those years before the new sewer system, dealing with waste was a constant daily struggle. Every trip to the privy was an ordeal. Every drink of water was a gamble. Every breath of air carried the smell of decay and disease. They lived with it because they had to, because they didn't know there was an alternative, because they thought that's just how cities worked. Getting more comfortable, muscles melting into the bed, and feeling so grateful for all the invisible infrastructure that makes modern life possible. Even their clothes reflected the reality of living in a dirty world. Dark colours were popular because they hid stains better. Heavy fabrics were preferred because they lasted longer between washings. Elaborate decorations and patterns helped disguise spots and smudges. Fashion wasn't just about looking good, it was about looking good in a world where staying clean was nearly impossible. Women's long skirts weren't just fashionable, they were practical. They hid dirty shoes and stockings. They swept along the ground, picking up mud and refuse. But that was better than having your legs exposed to all the filth in the streets. Men's dark suits served the same purpose. Coal dust, horse manure, sewage splashback, it all blended into dark wool. A gentleman could walk through the streets of London and still look relatively presentable when he arrived at his destination. That's it, nice and relaxed, thinking about how every aspect of their lives was shaped by the reality of living in a dirty world. And yet, they persevered. They found ways to be happy, to celebrate, to find beauty in their world despite all its challenges. They fell in love and got married and raised families. They wrote poetry and painted pictures and composed music. They were human beings living human lives, just with a lot more sewage involved. The transformation that happened during the Victorian era, from the chaos of the early 1800s to the relative cleanliness of the early 1900s, represents one of the greatest improvements in public health in human history. It saved millions of lives. It made modern urban life possible. It showed that with enough political will and engineering skill, even the most overwhelming problems could be solved. Your body feels heavy and comfortable, settling deeper as you think about the incredible resilience and ingenuity of people facing seemingly impossible challenges. But let's talk about something that really shows how different things were: women's hygiene during that time of the month. You know those convenient products you can just pick up at any store, the ones designed specifically for comfort and protection? Yeah, those didn't exist at all. Your muscles soften as you think about how much easier modern life is, even for the most basic biological functions. Victorian women had to get creative, and by creative I mean they had to figure out how to deal with their periods using whatever they could find around the house. Most women used rags, literally just strips of cloth torn from old clothing or linens. They'd fold them up, position them as best they could, and hope for the best. These rags could be washed and reused, which was good because buying new fabric was expensive, but washing them was, well, let's just say it was another chore in an already long list of unpleasant tasks. You'd have to rinse them in cold water. Hot water would set the stains, then scrub them with whatever soap you could afford, then hang them somewhere to dry. And where do you hang menstrual rags to dry? You can't exactly put them on the line outside for all the neighbours to see, so they'd hang them in bedrooms, in basements, anywhere private where they could air dry without causing scandal. A comfortable sigh escapes, and you're suddenly very grateful for modern conveniences. Wealthy women had it slightly better. They could afford softer fabrics, maybe even some purpose-made cloths, but even they were dealing with essentially the same system. Rags, washing, reusing, repeat. The really wealthy might have had servants to deal with the washing, but that meant, well, your most intimate hygiene was being handled by people who were essentially strangers. People who were probably gossiping about it in the servants' quarters. Privacy was pretty much non-existent when it came to personal hygiene. And here's the thing, doctors of the time had some truly bizarre ideas about menstruation. They thought it was caused by hysteria. They thought women became temporarily insane during their periods. They prescribed all sorts of weird treatments. Cold baths, bloodletting, doses of mercury. The same stuff that's toxic to humans. Doctors were prescribing it for menstrual cramps. Your breathing naturally slows, settling deeper as you think about how little medical science understood about women's bodies. The first disposable menstrual products weren't invented until the late 1800s, and even then they were not great. Early tampons were basically just cotton wadding with no applicator. Pads were thick, bulky things that attached to belts worn around the waist. And they were expensive. Really expensive. Most women couldn't afford them, so they stuck with the rag system well into the 20th century. But at least by then, people were starting to understand that menstruation was normal, that it wasn't caused by moral failing or mental illness, that women didn't need to be locked away or treated like invalids once a month. Progress, but very slow progress. Speaking of medical treatments, oh boy. Victorian medicine was, let's call it, experimental. Doctors didn't really understand what caused most diseases, so their treatments were basically just educated guessing, and some of the guesses were, well, terrifying. Take bloodletting, for example. Doctors thought that most illnesses were caused by having too much blood, so their solution was to drain some out. They'd use leeches or make cuts in your arms or use special cups to suck blood out through your skin. Feeling weak and dizzy? Must be too much blood. Headache? Definitely too much blood. Broken leg? Well, probably still too much blood. Somehow. Nice and easy, just breathing and thinking about how scary it must have been to get sick in an era when the cure might be worse than the disease. Mercury was the wonder drug of the Victorian era. Doctors prescribed it for everything. Syphilis, depression, constipation, teething in babies. If you had a problem, mercury was probably going to be part of the solution. Of course, mercury is incredibly toxic. It causes brain damage, kidney failure, birth defects, but doctors didn't know that. They just knew that mercury seemed to do something when you gave it to patients. The fact that it was slowly poisoning them, well, that wasn't really understood until much later. People would come to doctors with minor ailments and leave with mercury poisoning, which caused new symptoms, which required more treatment, which often involved more mercury. It was a vicious cycle that probably killed more people than it helped. Opium was another popular treatment for everything. Couldn't sleep? Opium. In pain? Opium. Crying baby? Give the baby some opium. Yes, they gave opium to babies regularly. There were patent medicines specifically marketed for teething infants that were basically just opium syrup. Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup was incredibly popular among mothers because it would instantly calm fussy babies. Your shoulders drop, releasing tension as you realize how dangerous everyday life was when nobody understood basic pharmacology. The thing is, opium did work. It relieved pain, helped people sleep, calmed anxiety, but it was also incredibly addictive. Victorian England had a massive opium addiction problem, partly because doctors were prescribing it for everything, and partly because people could buy it over the counter at any pharmacy. You could walk into a chemist's shop and buy laudanum, which was basically liquid opium, the same way you'd buy aspirin today. No prescription needed, no questions asked. Housewives were buying it for menstrual cramps and accidentally becoming opium addicts. Workers were using it for back pain and couldn't stop. Children were being given it for minor illnesses and developing dependencies before they could even walk. And nobody really understood why people kept wanting more and more of these medicines. Addiction wasn't well understood. People thought it was a moral failing, not a medical condition. Getting more comfortable now, muscles relaxing, as you think about how much medical science has advanced. Surgery was basically a death sentence. There was no anesthesia until the very late Victorian period, and even then it was dangerous and unpredictable. Most surgical procedures were done with the patient fully conscious, held down by assistants while the surgeon worked as quickly as possible. Can you imagine having a tooth pulled or a limb amputated or a tumour removed while you're completely awake and feeling everything? They'd give you a leather strap to bite down on and a shot of whiskey, and that was about it for pain management. Surgery was something you only did if the alternative was certain death, and even if you survived the procedure, infection was almost guaranteed. Doctors didn't understand that they should wash their hands or sterilize their instruments. They'd go from examining diseased corpses to performing surgery without even wiping their hands clean. Hospital infections killed more people than the original injuries or illnesses. Going to a hospital was often riskier than just staying home and hoping for the best. A yawn escapes, and you're so grateful for modern medicine and sterile surgical procedures. Dentistry was even worse than regular medicine. Most people just lived with toothaches until the teeth fell out or the pain became absolutely unbearable. When they finally sought treatment, it usually meant extraction. And extractions were done without anesthesia, using pliers or other crude tools. The dentist, who was often just the local blacksmith or barber, would grab the tooth and yank it out as quickly as possible while you screamed. Rich people could afford to have false teeth made, but they were not great. Early dentures were carved from wood, or made from the teeth of dead people, or even from animal teeth. They didn't fit well, they made eating difficult, and they rotted quickly. George Washington famously had multiple sets of dentures, and none of them worked very well. His last set was made from hippo teeth and gold wire. Can you imagine trying to eat with hippo teeth wired into your mouth? Most people just went without teeth. They'd eat soft foods, mumble when they talked, and look decades older than they actually were. Your breathing deepens, settling into the story, thinking about how much we take modern dental care for granted. But here's something interesting. Despite all these medical challenges, people still tried to look their best. Beauty standards existed, and people went to incredible lengths to meet them. Pale skin was fashionable because it showed you didn't have to work outside in the sun. So women would do everything possible to stay pale. They'd use parasols, wear long gloves, cover their faces with veils. And if natural paleness wasn't enough, they'd use makeup. Lead-based face powder was incredibly popular because it created a perfectly white, smooth complexion. The fact that lead causes brain damage and death, well, that wasn't really understood. Women would literally poison themselves daily for the sake of fashion. Rouge was made with mercury or other toxic substances. Lipstick contained lead. Eyeliner was made with antimony, which could cause blindness. Getting ready for a fancy party meant covering yourself in toxic metals and hoping you didn't get sick before the evening was over. That's it, nice and relaxed, muscles melting into the mattress as you think about the irony of people trying to look healthy while slowly poisoning themselves. Hairstyling was another adventure. Without modern products, women had to get creative. They'd use sugar water to create hold or beer to add body and shine. They'd sleep with their hair wrapped around rags or sticks to create curls. And they'd rarely wash it. Remember, hair washing was a monthly event at best, so all these styling products would just accumulate, layer after layer of sugar, beer, pomade, powder, all building up over weeks until it formed a kind of helmet around their heads. The smell must have been complex, sweet and sour and rancid all at the same time. Wealthy women might have elaborate wigs instead of styling their natural hair. These wigs were, well, they were works of art, towering structures with feathers and jewels and even miniature ships or gardens built into them. But wigs had their own problems. They were hot and heavy. They attracted lice and other insects. And they were expensive to maintain. You had to take them to a specialist to be cleaned and restyled. Plus, if you wore the same wig for weeks at a time, well, your scalp underneath wasn't getting much air or cleaning. Scalp infections were common among fashionable women. Your body feels heavy and comfortable, settling deeper as you imagine the discomfort of wearing a massive, insect-infested wig just to look fashionable. Men had their own grooming challenges. Shaving was done with straight razors, basically just very sharp knives. No safety features, no electric razors, just a blade that could easily slice your throat open and whatever skill you'd managed to develop. Most men went to barbers for shaving, but that meant sharing razors with dozens of other men, razors that weren't sterilised between customers, so you could go in for a shave and come out with someone else's skin disease. Wealthy men might have had their own personal razors, but even then, keeping them sharp and clean was a constant challenge, and moustaches and beards were popular, partly because they were easier to maintain than being clean-shaven. You could trim them occasionally and otherwise just let them grow, much safer than daily shaving with a straight razor. The downside was that facial hair trapped food, tobacco, dust and all the other debris floating around Victorian air. Men's moustaches were basically filters for all the gross stuff in the environment. A comfortable sigh escapes, and you're thinking about how much simpler and safer modern grooming is. Public baths were starting to become popular in some areas, which was a huge improvement for people who didn't have bathing facilities at home. These were essentially large pools where multiple people would bathe at the same time, but, well, they came with their own set of problems. The water wasn't changed very often. People with all sorts of diseases and skin conditions would use the same pools, and there was no filtration or chemical treatment to kill bacteria. So while public baths were cleaner than not bathing at all, they were also excellent places to catch whatever diseases other bathers might be carrying. Still, they were popular because for many people it was the only chance they had for a real full-body wash. Workers would save up their pennies to afford a visit to the public baths once a week or once a month. The experience was social. People would chat, gossip, conduct business. It was like a community centre that happened to involve being naked in dirty water with strangers, nice and easy, just breathing and thinking about how different social norms were when privacy was such a luxury. Despite all these challenges, people found ways to feel good about themselves. They developed their own standards of cleanliness within the constraints of their world. They took pride in having clean hands and faces, even if the rest of them wasn't so fresh. They valued nice clothing, good grooming, pleasant breath. They used what resources they had to present themselves as well as possible. And they adapted. They became accustomed to smells that would horrify us today. They developed tolerance for discomfort that seems incredible by modern standards. In a way, it's impressive. These people were incredibly resilient. They lived full, rich lives despite conditions that we would consider intolerable. Your muscles continue to relax, sinking deeper into comfort as you think about human adaptability and resilience. Children grew up in this environment and thought it was normal. They played in streets filled with garbage and sewage. They helped their families with laundry and chamber pots and all the unglamorous tasks of daily survival. And they still found ways to be children, to play games, tell stories, laugh with their friends. They adapted to their world just like children always do. The wealthy tried to shield their children from the worst of it, but even rich kids lived in a world without antibiotics, without vaccines, without basic understanding of hygiene and disease prevention. Childhood mortality was heartbreakingly high. Families would have many children knowing that only some of them would survive to adulthood. Parents couldn't protect their children from diseases they didn't understand. Yet people still fell in love, got married, had families. They still celebrated holidays and birthdays. They still had hopes and dreams for the future. They were living human lives in a world that was challenging in ways we can barely imagine, getting cozy now, really settling in, and feeling a deep appreciation for all the invisible systems that keep us healthy and safe today. Now let's talk about food, because Victorian food hygiene was, well, let's just say you'd probably lose a lot of weight if you had to eat like a Victorian. Not because the food was healthy, because you'd be too terrified to eat most of it. Your muscles relax as you think about that clean, safe refrigerator in your kitchen, full of food that won't kill you. See, refrigeration didn't exist at all. The best people could do was ice boxes, and ice was expensive and hard to come by. Most people just kept their food at room temperature and hoped for the best, which meant that meat started going bad almost immediately after slaughter. Milk would sour within hours in warm weather. Vegetables would rot quickly without proper storage. So, how did people deal with this? Well, they got creative. And by creative, I mean they developed some truly questionable preservation methods. Salt was huge. People would pack meat in so much salt that it was basically mummified. It would last longer, but it was also, well, incredibly salty and tough, and not particularly nutritious after all that processing. Smoking was popular too. They'd hang meat in smokehouses for days or weeks, letting the smoke slowly dry and preserve it. Again, it lasted longer, but it was also carcinogenic as hell. People were basically eating charcoal-flavoured jerky for most of their protein. A yawn escapes. And you're so grateful for modern food safety regulations. Pickling was another option. They'd soak vegetables in vinegar or brine for months at a time. Everything was pickled. Cabbage, onions, eggs, even meat sometimes. The acid would kill bacteria and preserve the food, but it also made everything taste, well, like vinegar. Imagine eating pickled everything for months at a time. Your poor stomach. And then there was the really desperate preservation method. Just eating food that was already going bad and hoping it wouldn't kill you. Meat that was starting to turn green, cover it with spices and cook it thoroughly. Milk that was curdling, turn it into cheese. Bread that was getting mouldy, cut off the worst parts and eat the rest. People developed iron stomachs out of necessity. They had to. The alternative was starvation. Your breathing naturally slows, settling deeper as you think about how much we take food safety for granted. But here's the really scary part. People couldn't tell what was safe and what wasn't. There were no expiration dates, no health inspectors, no understanding of bacteria or foodborne illness. So people would eat spoiled food and get sick, but they'd blame it on bad air or evil spirits or just bad luck. They didn't understand the connection between rotten food and illness. Milk was particularly dangerous. It was often watered down by unscrupulous vendors, and the water they used was, well, the same contaminated water everyone was drinking. So you'd buy milk thinking you were getting something nutritious, and instead you'd get diluted sewage water with a bit of actual milk mixed in. And baby formula? That wasn't a thing. If a mother couldn't breastfeed, they'd give babies cow's milk or goat's milk or whatever was available. Often this milk was contaminated or spoiled. Infant mortality from digestive illnesses was heartbreakingly common. Even when food was fresh, preparation was risky. Kitchens were dirty, knives were rarely cleaned properly, and people didn't understand cross-contamination. You'd cut raw meat on a wooden board, then slice bread on the same board without washing it. Getting more comfortable, and thinking about how many invisible food safety measures protect us every day. Working conditions made everything worse. If you worked in a factory, you'd be covered in soot and chemical residue all day. Then you'd come home and handle food with those same unwashed hands. Factory workers often ate their lunches right on the factory floor, surrounded by machinery that was leaking oil and spewing toxic fumes. They'd unwrap a piece of bread and eat it while breathing in lead dust or mercury vapor. Miners had it even worse. They'd spend all day underground, covered in coal dust or mineral particles, then eat their meals down in the mine. Black lung disease was common, partly from breathing contaminated air while eating. And agricultural workers, they were handling manure all day, both human and animal manure, remember, then eating their lunches with those same hands. No wonder disease spread so quickly in rural areas. People just didn't connect hygiene with health. They thought disease was caused by moral failings or bad luck or supernatural forces. The idea that washing your hands before eating could prevent illness was revolutionary. Your shoulders drop, releasing that tension, as you think about how basic hand washing has saved millions of lives. Even the wealthy had problems with food safety. Their cooks might have been better trained, but they were still working with the same spoiled ingredients and contaminated water as everyone else. Rich people could afford more variety in their diet, but variety didn't necessarily mean safety. They'd import exotic foods from other countries, foods that had been sitting in ship holds for months without refrigeration, tropical fruits that were rotting from the inside out, spices that were full of insects and mold. And fancy Victorian dinner parties, those elaborate multi-course meals that lasted for hours. The food was sitting out at room temperature the entire time. By the time they got to the 7th or 8th course, they were basically eating science experiments. Plus, wealthy people had this weird obsession with foods that were, well, intentionally gross. They'd eat things like potted meat, which was basically any kind of meat ground up and mixed with fat and spices, then packed into jars and left to ferment. They thought fermented foods were sophisticated. They'd eat cheese that was literally crawling with maggots and consider it a delicacy. Nice and easy. Just breathing. And honestly, some Victorian delicacies sound absolutely horrifying. The poor had their own food challenges. They couldn't afford fresh meat or vegetables most of the time, so they'd buy whatever was cheapest, which was usually whatever was about to go bad that the vendors couldn't sell to anyone else. There were markets specifically for second-hand food, meat that was starting to turn, produce that was bruised or rotting, dairy products that were past their prime. Poor people would shop these markets because it was all they could afford. And street vendors? Oh boy, street vendors would sell food that had been sitting out in the sun all day, covered in flies and dust and God knows what else. Meat pies made from mystery meat, milk that had been sitting in dirty containers, bread that was more sawdust than flour. But people were hungry, and hungry people eat whatever they can get. A comfortable sigh escapes, and you're thinking about how food insecurity makes every choice a gamble. Alcohol was often safer than water, which led to some interesting dietary habits. People would drink beer or wine with every meal, including children. It wasn't that they were trying to get drunk. It was that fermented beverages were less likely to make you sick than contaminated water. So Victorian children would start their day with small beer, a low-alcohol brew that was considered a breakfast drink. Workers would drink beer throughout the day to stay hydrated. Even babies were sometimes given diluted alcohol instead of water. This led to a society where mild intoxication was basically the default state for a lot of people. Not drunk exactly, but not completely sober either, which probably made the smells and discomfort of daily life a bit more tolerable, honestly. The spice trade existed partly because spices helped mask the taste of spoiled food. If your meat was going bad, you'd load it up with pepper and cinnamon and hope for the best. Strong flavours covered up the taste of decay. That's why Victorian cooking was so heavily spiced compared to earlier periods. It wasn't just about flavour, it was about survival. Your breathing deepens, settling into the story, thinking about how every aspect of their lives was shaped by the constant threat of illness and contamination. Public health measures were minimal. There were no health inspectors checking restaurants or food vendors, no regulations about how food should be stored or prepared, no requirements for clean water or proper waste disposal. If you got sick from eating contaminated food, that was just life. Bad luck. Something to endure and hope you survived. The first food safety laws weren't passed until the very end of the Victorian era, and even then they were limited and poorly enforced. It took decades of lobbying by reformers and scientists to convince governments that regulating food safety was actually important. Before that, it was basically buyer beware. If a vendor wanted to sell you rotten meat covered in flies, that was perfectly legal. If a baker wanted to mix sawdust into his bread to make it cheaper, no problem. Fraud was rampant in the food industry. Milk was watered down, beer was diluted, bread was mixed with chalk or alum to make it look whiter. People were paying for food and getting, well, not food. And there was no way to test these things, no way to know what you were actually eating. You just had to trust that the vendor wasn't trying to poison you for profit. Getting cozy now, muscles relaxing, as you think about how much regulation and oversight goes into every bite of food we eat today. The wealthy tried to protect themselves by hiring food tasters or buying from trusted vendors, but even that wasn't foolproof. Rich people got food poisoning too. They just had better access to medical care when it happened. Poor people often had no choice but to eat whatever they could afford, even if they suspected it might be contaminated. Better to risk getting sick than to definitely starve. And children were especially vulnerable. Their developing immune systems couldn't handle the constant assault of contaminated food and water. Child mortality from digestive illnesses was one of the leading causes of death. Parents would watch their children get sick over and over again from the food they were providing, but there wasn't much they could do about it. Clean, safe food was a luxury most families couldn't afford. The gradual improvement in food safety over the late Victorian period probably saved more lives than any other single public health measure. When people could finally trust that their food wouldn't kill them, overall health improved dramatically. But it took decades of scientific research, political lobbying, and public pressure to make those changes happen. And even then, improvements came slowly and unevenly. That's it. Really settling in now, thinking about how many invisible systems work together to keep us safe and healthy. Personal hygiene standards started to improve gradually as well, but change was slow. The wealthy led the way, partly because they could afford soap and clean water, and partly because they had social pressure to maintain appearances. Middle-class families started bathing more frequently, maybe twice a week instead of once. They started changing their clothes more often. They invested in better soap and grooming products, but old habits died hard. Even wealthy families who could afford daily baths often didn't take them because they'd been raised to believe that too much bathing was unhealthy. And the poor, well, the poor were still struggling with basic survival. When you're working 14-hour days in a factory for barely enough money to buy food, spending money on soap and taking time for bathing feels like an impossible luxury. Social attitudes toward cleanliness were starting to shift though. Being clean was becoming associated with being moral, respectable, successful. Dirty people were seen as lazy or immoral, regardless of their actual circumstances. This created pressure to at least appear clean. Even if you couldn't afford to actually be clean, people would wash their hands and faces carefully, keep their visible clothing as clean as possible, and hope nobody noticed the rest. Your body feels heavy and comfortable, sinking deeper into the mattress as you think about the social pressure to maintain appearances even when basic hygiene was so difficult. The invention of cheaper soap helped a lot. Early Victorian soap was expensive and harsh. It was made with lye and animal fat, and it would strip your skin raw if you used too much of it. But as manufacturing improved, soap became cheaper and gentler. Companies started marketing different types of soap for different purposes. Gentle soap for faces, strong soap for laundry, medicated soap for skin problems. This was revolutionary. For the first time, ordinary people could afford to have multiple types of soap. They could choose products specifically designed for their needs instead of just using whatever they could get. Advertising played a huge role in changing attitudes toward hygiene. Soap companies started running campaigns that associated their products with beauty, health, and social success. They'd show before and after pictures of people who looked healthier and happier after using their soap. They'd create elaborate stories about the social benefits of being clean. These ads were often ridiculous by today's standards, but they were effective. They helped create a culture where being clean was seen as important, desirable, and achievable. Nice and easy, just breathing. And thinking about how marketing helped shift entire cultural attitudes toward hygiene. Medical understanding was slowly improving too. The discovery that diseases were caused by germs rather than bad air was gradually gaining acceptance in the medical community. This led to new recommendations about hand washing, wound care, and general cleanliness. Doctors started telling patients to wash their hands before eating, to keep wounds clean and covered, to avoid sharing eating utensils. These recommendations seem obvious now, but at the time they were revolutionary. People had never connected personal hygiene with disease prevention. Hospitals started implementing basic sanitation measures. They began washing their instruments between patients, requiring doctors to wash their hands, isolating patients with contagious diseases. Death rates in hospitals dropped dramatically as these measures were implemented. It became clear that cleanliness really was connected to health, not just social status. Your muscles continue to melt into relaxation as you think about the incredible progress that happened once people understood the connection between cleanliness and health. Schools started teaching basic hygiene to children. They'd have lessons about washing hands, brushing teeth, keeping clothes clean. Children would bring these lessons home to their families, gradually spreading better hygiene practices throughout the community. This was especially important in poor areas where adults might not have access to health information, but children could learn it at school and share it with their families. Public health campaigns began promoting basic sanitation measures. Posters would show people how to wash their hands properly, how to dispose of waste safely, how to keep their homes clean. These campaigns were often funded by soap companies or other businesses that benefited from increased hygiene, but they still provided valuable public education. The message was simple but revolutionary. Being clean will keep you healthy. Taking care of your body is important. You have some control over whether you get sick. Settling deeper now, feeling that warm, heavy comfort as you think about how empowering it must have been to finally understand that you could take steps to protect your own health. You know what's amazing though? Despite all of these challenges, despite living in a world where basic cleanliness was a daily struggle, people still found ways to take pride in their appearance. They still fell in love, still got married, still raised families and celebrated holidays, and found moments of joy and beauty in their lives. Your breathing slows naturally, deeper and more relaxed, as you think about the incredible resilience of the human spirit. Victorian women would spend hours getting ready for special occasions, even with all the limitations they faced. They'd carefully wash their faces and hands with whatever soap they could afford. They'd brush their hair for what felt like forever, trying to work through weeks of accumulated oils and styling products. They'd put on their best dress, the one they'd been saving and carefully maintaining for months. They'd add whatever jewellery or accessories they owned. They'd dab a bit of perfume on their wrists, hoping it would last the evening. And you know what? They felt beautiful. They felt special. They felt ready to face the world. Because beauty, real beauty, isn't about having perfect hygiene or expensive products. It's about feeling good in your own skin, whatever that skin happens to smell like. The wealthy had more resources. Sure, they could afford better soaps, finer clothing, more elaborate beauty routines. But they were dealing with the same basic limitations as everyone else. No running water, no understanding of germs, no effective medicine. A comfortable sigh escapes, and you're thinking about how people have always found ways to feel good about themselves, regardless of their circumstances. Rich Victorian women would have servants to help them dress and do their hair, but those servants were often dirtier than their employers. The irony was that the people maintaining everyone else's cleanliness often had no time or resources to maintain their own. Maids would spend their days washing other people's clothes, cleaning other people's chamber pots, helping other people bathe, then go home to their own overcrowded, unsanitary living conditions. Butler and footman would polish silver and serve elaborate meals while wearing gloves to hide their own unwashed hands. They'd maintain perfect posture and impeccable manners while their own bodies were crying out for basic care. The class system meant that cleanliness became a marker of social status. If you could afford to be clean, you were obviously successful. If you were dirty, you were obviously poor and probably morally deficient too. This created enormous pressure on working class people to at least appear clean. Even when they couldn't afford to actually be clean, they'd wash their hands and faces obsessively, keep their visible clothing as neat as possible, and hope nobody looked too closely. Your shoulders naturally drop, releasing that tension as you think about the unfairness of judging people's character based on things they couldn't control. But slowly, very slowly, things began to change. The Great Stink of 1858 was really the turning point. When the smell from the Thames became so bad that even Parliament couldn't function, the government finally had to act. Bazalgette's sewer system wasn't just about moving waste away from the city centre, it was about fundamentally changing how people thought about sanitation and public health. For the first time, people could see that human engineering could solve problems that had seemed unsolvable. That government action could actually improve people's daily lives in concrete, measurable ways. When the new sewers came online and the smell disappeared, it was like magic. People who had lived their entire lives breathing contaminated air suddenly found themselves able to walk along the Thames without gagging. Property values in previously undesirable areas shot up overnight. People started moving back to neighbourhoods they'd abandoned because of the smell. Businesses that had been struggling because customers wouldn't visit them suddenly found themselves thriving. Getting more comfortable, settling deeper into your bed as you imagine what it must have felt like to finally be able to breathe clean air. The psychological impact was enormous. People realised that they didn't have to just accept terrible living conditions. That change was possible, that their lives could actually get better. This sparked a whole movement toward urban reform. People started demanding better housing, cleaner streets, safer working conditions. They organised politically around public health issues. Women played a huge role in this movement. They were the ones dealing with most of the daily challenges of maintaining family health and hygiene. They understood better than anyone how desperately things needed to change. They formed organisations focused on public health, child welfare and sanitation reform. They lobbied for better housing laws, cleaner water supplies and improved medical care for the poor. These women were fighting for basic human dignity, the right to live in conditions that didn't make you sick, the right to raise children who might actually survive to adulthood. Your breathing becomes slower, more rhythmic, as you think about the courage it took to fight for change in a world that seemed determined to stay the same. Scientific understanding was advancing too. The work of people like Louis Pasteur was beginning to prove that diseases were caused by microorganisms, not by moral failings or bad air. This was revolutionary. For the first time in human history, people could understand why they got sick and what they could do to prevent it. Hand washing went from being a nice social custom to being a medical necessity. Cleaning wounds became a matter of life and death, not just aesthetics. Proper food storage and preparation could literally save lives. The implications were staggering. It meant that poverty didn't have to equal disease, that with proper knowledge and basic resources, people could dramatically improve their own health outcomes. Of course, translating this knowledge into practice took time. Old habits died hard. Many people continued to believe in traditional explanations for disease well into the 20th century, but gradually, very gradually, the message spread. Schools started teaching basic hygiene. Doctors started emphasizing prevention as well as treatment. Public health campaigns promoted hand washing and sanitation. Your eyelids are starting to feel heavy now, that warm, drowsy feeling spreading through your body as you think about the slow but steady progress toward a cleaner, healthier world. The transformation wasn't just about hygiene, it was about hope. For the first time in generations, people could realistically expect their children to have better lives than they did. Child mortality rates began to drop. People started living longer. Diseases that had terrorized previous generations became less common. This created a positive feedback loop. As people got healthier, they had more energy to work on improving their conditions further. As living conditions improved, people got even healthier. The wealthy led the way, as they always do, but improvements gradually trickled down to the working classes. Better soap became affordable, basic medical care became more accessible, public health measures protected everyone, regardless of their social status. By the end of the Victorian era, London was transforming from one of the dirtiest cities in the world to one of the cleanest. The air was clearer, the water was safer, the streets were less disgusting. People could walk through the city without constantly worrying about what they might step in or breathe in. They could drink water without wondering if it would kill them. They could eat food with some confidence that it wouldn't make them sick. Your body feels heavier now, sinking deeper into the mattress as you imagine the relief and wonder of experiencing these improvements after a lifetime of struggle. But perhaps the most important change was psychological. People began to believe that they deserved better, that basic cleanliness and health weren't luxuries reserved for the wealthy, they were fundamental human rights. This shift in thinking would continue into the 20th century and beyond. It would drive improvements in housing, working conditions, medical care, and social services. The Victorian hygiene revolution was really about human dignity, about the radical idea that everyone, regardless of their social class or economic status, deserved to live in conditions that supported their health and well-being. The people who fought for these changes didn't live to see all the benefits. Many of them spent their entire lives dealing with the same unsanitary conditions they were trying to reform. But they believed in the possibility of a better future. They worked toward changes that would benefit their children and grandchildren, even if they couldn't benefit themselves. Your breathing becomes even deeper, more relaxed, as you think about the selflessness and vision it took to work toward a future they might never see. There's something deeply moving about that, about people who were struggling just to survive, taking time and energy to advocate for improvements that might not help them personally. They understood that everyone's health was connected, that diseases didn't respect class boundaries, that improving conditions for the poorest people would ultimately benefit everyone. The Victorian era taught us that even the most overwhelming problems can be solved with enough determination, scientific understanding, and political will. The Great Stink seemed like an impossible crisis. How do you clean up centuries of accumulated waste from a city of millions of people? But they figured it out. They built infrastructure that's still working today. The cholera outbreaks seemed unstoppable, a mysterious disease that killed thousands of people with no warning, but they figured out the cause and developed prevention strategies that saved countless lives. Your eyelids are growing heavier now, that drowsy, comfortable feeling spreading through your entire body as you reflect on the incredible progress that's possible when people work together toward common goals. Think about your own life for a moment. The shower you took this morning, the clean clothes you put on, the safe food you ate, the medicine you take when you're sick. All of these things exist because of the work that Victorian reformers started, because people who lived in truly terrible conditions refused to accept that things had to stay that way. They couldn't have imagined the world we live in now. Antibiotics that can cure diseases that killed millions of people. Water treatment plants that provide clean drinking water to entire cities. Food safety regulations that prevent most of the illnesses they dealt with daily. But they dreamed of a cleaner, healthier world. And they took the first crucial steps toward making that dream real. Your body feels completely relaxed now, heavy and comfortable against the soft sheets as you think about the long arc of human progress. We're still working on many of the same challenges they faced. Access to clean water and sanitation is still a problem in many parts of the world. Poverty still makes people more vulnerable to disease. Social inequality still affects health outcomes. But we've learned so much. We understand things that baffled them completely. We have tools and technologies they couldn't have imagined. And most importantly, we have their example. We know that change is possible, that even the most entrenched problems can be solved with persistence and creativity and hope. Your breathing is becoming slower now, deeper and more peaceful as you settle into the comfort of your clean, safe bed. Think about how different your evening routine is from theirs. You brushed your teeth with safe, effective toothpaste and a soft toothbrush. You washed your face with gentle soap and clean water. You put on fresh, clean pajamas. You can drink water from the tap without worrying about cholera. You can eat food without wondering if it will make you sick. You can sleep in a bed with clean sheets, in a room with fresh air, in a house with proper plumbing. All of these things, these simple, everyday comforts, represent victories in the long struggle for human health and dignity. The Victorians who fought for these improvements would be amazed and delighted to see how far we've come. They'd probably be shocked by our daily hygiene routines, but they'd understand why they matter. Your eyelids are feeling heavier and heavier, that peaceful, drowsy sensation flowing through your entire body as you appreciate all the invisible systems that keep you safe and healthy. You're lying in a clean bed, breathing clean air, in a warm room that doesn't smell like sewage or smoke or decay. Your body is clean and comfortable. Your stomach is full of safe, nutritious food. These are gifts that took generations to achieve, gifts that millions of people worked toward, often without seeing the benefits themselves. Tonight, as you drift off to sleep, you're the beneficiary of all their struggles and dreams and hard work. Your breathing is becoming slower and more rhythmic, in and out, as your body naturally prepares for rest. Let your muscles relax completely, starting with your toes, your feet, your legs, just letting go of any remaining tension. Your torso sinks deeper into the mattress. Your arms feel heavy and comfortable at your sides. Your shoulders drop as they release the day's stress. Your neck relaxes. Your jaw softens. Your face becomes peaceful and calm. And your eyelids, so heavy now, just wanting to close, to rest. Let them close, that's it. Just letting your eyes rest as your breathing becomes even deeper and more peaceful. You're safe and clean and comfortable, surrounded by all the invisible protections that keep you healthy. Your mind is quiet now, drifting away from the struggles of the Victorian era and into the peaceful present, where the air is clean and the water is safe, and your bed is warm and soft. Just breathing, slowly, peacefully, as you sink deeper into comfort and rest. Letting go of the day, letting go of any worries, just floating in this space of gratitude and peace. Your body knows how to sleep, how to rest and restore itself, and you can just let it do what it knows how to do, deeper and deeper into peaceful sleep, where your dreams are gentle and your rest is complete, safe and clean and comfortable, drifting off now into the soft embrace of sleep. That's it, just letting go, sinking deeper into peaceful, restorative sleep. Sleep well.